1. And I must have missed something. Let's see. There we go. That's where I mean to be. Okay. Last few weeks, we've been in the 7th and 8th chapter of John. And here in a moment, we'll look at verse 48. But we see Jesus as he's come back to Jerusalem. He's at the Feast of the Tabernacles. And the Jews are there, the leaders of the Jews, the Pharisees, the high priest, the Jewish council is there, and they are throwing everything they can at him. And they let him know that they do not believe in him at all. They are people who are offended by the things he's saying. And they're being very clear about this. Last week we got toward the end of the 8th chapter, and we got looking at a few things that about they're going back and forth about our spiritual freedom and about death. And you know, Jesus said, if you knew God, you would know me. The reason you don't know me is because you don't know God. And if you knew me and you knew God, you will never die. Now, they did not understand that concept. Death is separation. And what he's saying is, if you know God and you know Jesus Christ, you're doing their will, following the will of the Father, then, oh yes, we're going to be separated from this earth someday, as we all will be, but we're not going to be separated from God. And that's the part they did not understand. So they were dealing with that. And, you know, when they were talking about Abraham, Abraham's our father. And so, you know, here you're saying, if you know God, and Abraham knew God, he died. Well, just showing their ignorance once again, that they didn't understand the things that he was saying. So all these things had come about. It's just been like, have you ever got with someone, your conversation just keeps going in a circle? You know, it just keeps going, and that's what's happened here. For the 2 days, it keeps going in a circle. We're going to read verses 48 through 59, finish out this chapter, and finish out this little lesson. And as we read this, you're going to see some more of this take place. And when we get through reading this, I'm not really going to go in that part of it so much because we have talked about it so much in the last couple of weeks. But let's start in verse 48 and finish this part out. It says that the Jews answered and said unto him, Say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil? Jesus answered, I have not a devil, but I honor my Father, and ye dishonor me. But I seek not my own glory. There is one that seeketh and judgeth. Verily, verily, I say unto you, if a man keep my word, he shall never see death. The Jews said unto him, Now we know that thou hast a devil. Abraham is dead, and the prophets. And thou sayest, if a man keep my words, he shall never taste of death. Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? And the prophets are dead, whom makest thou thyself? Jesus answered, If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is the Father that glorifieth me, of whom ye say that he is your God. And if you've known him, but I know him, and if I should say I know him not, I shall be like unto you, a liar. But I know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And the Jews therefore said unto him, Thou art yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? And Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And they took up stones before to cast him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Now, like I said, up to about verse 56, it is just circling around the same thing that's been going on. And so I'd like to kind of just talk about these last few verses, and maybe we can move on this morning. Abraham rejoiced to see Jesus. When did Jesus see Abraham? Okay, James says when Abraham was born. Okay? Because Jesus was already here. You know, that's what I believed, and I still believe that. I'm going to give you another alternate I came across but I think that is it. I think Jesus was with God from the beginning. He tells us that. And we know that through all the other scripture, that Jesus looked down on this earth. He saw Abraham. He knew where he was. But I was reading one of the commentaries, and he was talking about how on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus saw Moses and Elijah. And, you know, and he said, what would prevent Jesus having that same kind of experience with Abraham at some point? And the Bible just doesn't tell us about it. Possible.
Well, since Jesus actually was involved in the creation of everything, according to John chapter 1,
yes.
then he had already seen Moses and Abraham and
Elijah.
And all these others. He
Yes.
saw them when they were living.
Yes.
So at the Mount of Transfiguration was not the first time he had had a conversation with them.
Exactly.
I mean, that's implied. It doesn't say that specifically. But you know, it's very strongly implied because Jesus was there from the beginning.
Right. Jesus was there from the beginning. That's the one I would still hold to on that. Okay. You know, and they said to him, let's see, Jesus, you're not 50 years old yet, and you've seen Abraham? But Jesus said he was before Abraham, and we just answered that pretty much, that he was here from the beginning, wasn't he? He was here before Adam. He was here before all of these. He was a part of that creation. And the Genesis story in the first few chapters of Genesis tells us that. John chapter 1 tells us that. There's allusions to it in other places too. So Jesus was here. Now, kind of want to end up this little section here with this question. Have you ever been angry enough to pick up some big rocks and throw them at someone who angered you? Have you ever been that angry at somebody, you just go, oh, I want to take some rock, just throw them at, you know? I've been pretty angry at some people, but I don't know if I've ever been that angry, you know? I might want to give them a little sock in the jaw or something, but pick up rocks and just start throwing them at them and everything. You know, they got pretty angry back then, didn't they? Jesus really angered these people.
He did all of a sudden with that last statement he made.
Yes.
Because he said, before Abraham was, I am. God said that when Moses said, well, who am I going to say sent me to get the people out of captivity? He said that I am has sent you.
Yeah.
So what did Jesus just do? He called himself God.
Yes.
He just declared himself God, and oh no, you're not, and they're going to throw rocks at him.
Yes.
But that was that form of death at that time.
That's what they did.
Well,
Yeah.
they considered it blasphemy. Time to take him out.
And of course, they were already seeking to have them removed. They'd already sent soldiers to take them, and the soldiers wouldn't do it. They were ready to put them to death already. And then that put them over the top, though, didn't it, Mike?
At that moment, it sure did.
It sure did. It put them over the top at that moment. And so they are very, very angry at this. And so that's something that Jesus had to deal with. Well, it just left us at that. I would wonder if it was maybe like the day before, then everybody went home, because that's what happened the day before. They got to a boiling point and everybody decided to go home. But we're going to go home. We're going to go to another lesson. Timothy, if you would swap us over, please. We're going to take a look at something else this morning. Okay, so if you would go to Luke chapter 9. And we're going to start out in verse 51. Now, this section is Jesus leaving Galilee. What we just finished, he was in Jerusalem. And so I kind of got looking back and forth. And you know, one thing we know, the ministry of Jesus was approximately about 3.5 years, 1,200 days. And I hadn't really looked through the Bible myself to verify this, but you can kind of tell it by looking through that these 4 gospel writers, some say that they tell about 39 days of his ministry. 39 days out of 1,200 days. And, you know, of course, at the end of John, many other things Jesus did, you know, but I wrote this, that you may believe that he's the Son of God, you know, that you believe in his name. But so that tells us that there was just so many things that Jesus did that we don't know. So I'm taking, my take on this is that that after all this, Jesus did go back to Galilee one more time, but there's a gap there where we really don't know what all he did. I would assume just a lot of the same stuff he did before. It's just the same things were happening up there. So he's up in Galilee again and ready to come back to Jerusalem for the last time. Yes.
One of the things Jesus didn't address that they said he was a Samaritan.
I didn't talk about that. Yeah, okay.
But he didn't address that.
He didn't.
But he wasn't.
No, he wasn't a Samaritan.
That's an insult.
Yes.
That's an insult. You're a Samaritan and you're crazy.
He
Yes.
addressed the demon.
You know, there's some things an insult can fly, or some things you just ignore. You just got to ignore, and that's what he did. He just ignored it. Something we might need to work on better sometimes. Just ignore it. Let it go by. All right, Luke 9:51. And we're going to go to verse 56. Right there. Yeah. So it came to pass when the days were well nigh. Let me do that again. And it came to pass when the days were well nigh come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into the village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though as he were going to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, that they said, Lord, wilt thou that we bid fire come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. So Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. It was getting near that time now. We're getting near, you know, it was not his time in these earlier lessons. Now, but we're getting nearer to that time. So with that, he has set his face. He's determined to go to Jerusalem. Sometimes you and I call it, hey, I'm on a mission today, you know. There's a place I need to go, and I don't need taking side trips. I don't need to stop and chat with him, but I need to get there. I got to go. Maybe like you get a phone call, and you got a loved one, a close loved one down in the ER somewhere, and they say it's pretty bad, and you drop what you do and you go, don't you? You're on your way there. You're not going to stop by Cash Savers and pick up some snacks. You're going to go, aren't you? You're going to get there as quick as you can along the way. You're determined to go. And that's what I see Jesus as he is now in Galilee, but he's going to go back to Jerusalem. He's one that goes through Samaria. Other Jews wouldn't do that. We talked about that in much earlier lessons, but Jesus goes through Samaria. And then, but we notice the Samaritans, they wouldn't receive Jesus as he came through. Why is that? He treated them. He treated them right. Okay. Let's,
That's one reason. He wasn't like the normal Jew that come through there.
well, they wouldn't receive him, though. They didn't receive him.
I thought you asked a question. What did you ask?
I asked, why didn't they receive Jesus?
didn't? Oh.
They weren't receiving
You
Jesus.
said did.
No, they didn't.
You got to speak up for us older.
Verse 53 says that they did not receive him because why? He was set on going to Jerusalem, and they could see that. You know? They could see he did not want to be, for lack of a better term, bothered right then. He was set to go to Jerusalem. And so that just wasn't working for them. They wanted, you know, they stay with us, stop. And, we're the Samaritans. We know the Jews don't like us and everything, but you're supposed to be different. He was different when he stopped at the woman at the well, didn't he? And then later on, the people came in from the town, and he stayed there for a few days. And here it is sometime later, probably a couple of years later, from that event, and here he is, he's just wanting to go through. And now James and John know this, and what do they want to do?
Bring fire from heaven.
Yeah, let's bring some fire from heaven. Just Jesus, if they don't want to receive you, then let's take care of them. You got the power. Let's just put the kibosh on them right here. We can deal with these people, and they'll know your power and everything. Won't you just do that? But so what did Jesus do to James and John? He rebuked them, didn't he? He rebuked them, and no, no, that's not what Jesus came to this earth for. He didn't come to destroy us. He didn't come to say, "Oh, you're a murderer. I want to deal with you." He never did that. He never did anything like that. He would say, "You're lost, and you need to do something about it. And I can help you. I can get you in a situation where you won't be lost." He would do that, but he didn't come to destroy people. And so that's one of the things that we see here along the way, that he was teaching another lesson to his disciples who still didn't get it exactly right. I think they had most of it, but there are some things they didn't understand. And he says, "No, guys, we don't do that." And I think he told them in some pretty strong words, we don't treat people that way.
I think the part of their thinking was, well, these are just Samaritans.
Yeah.
Because the Jews looked down on Samaritans terribly bad. And it's, well, it's just Samaritans, let's just destroy them. I think maybe was a subconscious thought. Did they ever offer to command fire to destroy any Jews that rejected Jesus?
No, we never see that. No.
But they did the Samaritans.
The Samaritans,
So
though.
I think there's that influence that's there.
Yeah.
And the big lesson is that Jesus says, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to save these people.
Yes.
Samaritans and Jews.
And apparently he was stopping and doing some, because we're going to see that in some future verses. But
Well, the disciples, as the scripture said, they considered them as dogs. I'm sure
Yes.
they still had that attitude. So,
right,
let's just obliterate these.
just killing some wild dogs out here.
Yeah.
That's what it was about. That's why they thought of him. Thought I saw a hand pop up somewhere. I don't know. I'm seeing things. Okay. So let's continue on. 57. And then as they went in the way, a certain man said unto him, I will follow thee whithersoever thou goest. And Jesus said unto him, the foxes have holes, and the birds of the heaven have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. And he said unto another, follow me. But he said, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. But he said unto him, leave the dead to bury their own dead, but go thou and publish abroad the kingdom of God. And another also said, I will follow thee, Lord, but first suffer me to bid farewell to them that are at my house. But Jesus said unto him, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. Now, before I even put up the first little question or statement that I have, our next lesson after this, we go to chapter, chapter 10 here in just a few moments. And this is the mission of the 70. Jesus sends 70 out. Now, earlier he sent the 12 out. And when we get there, we're going to see that when he sends the 70 out, he's pretty much going to tell them the same thing he told the 12 when they went out. We'll get to that when we get there. But the point I want to make is he's left Galilee. He's heading back to Jerusalem. We know that there were 70 men that came with him. Now, if that's counting the apostles, that means 58 men that were, but I don't know if that includes them or not, but you got these 70 that were just like the apostles. They left their nets, their fishing nets. They left their tax collecting booth. They left their whatever they were doing for an occupation. They put those things down. They put them aside to go with Jesus back to Jerusalem. And along the way, this first man is, did Jesus ask this first man that comes to him, we're going to look at 3 here, did Jesus ask the first man to follow him? Go back and look at the text. No. The man just came up and started talking about this. We don't see Jesus saying to the man, follow me, but this man just comes up to Jesus, I would follow you, but. and so with that group that came with him, there were some others that I need, but. And they had their excuses. They were not there yet. And so with that, Lord, I would come and follow you, but. And, I'm just not ready for this yet. I would follow you wherever you go. And he didn't really give an excuse or anything. And so, but how did Jesus told him about his personal life was his answer. What did Jesus reveal?
He didn't want them to have a misconception that they were going to reap a lot from this. This is the situation. So.
Okay. The daily life of Jesus, as far as where did he eat and where did he sleep and where was his house? He didn't have a house. No house. Was that Carrie back there? What'd you say?
I just said he didn't have a home of his own.
He did not have a home of his own. No.
He didn't need it.
He didn't need it.
It didn't mean he was poor, he just didn't need it.
If he had it, he'd never be there, would he?
No, it wouldn't be useful for him to have.
Yeah. He said the birds have nests, the foxes have their hole, but he said, I don't have a place to lay my head. And so, there were times, I'm sure, that there were friends, disciples that, hey, stay in our home this evening or whatever it is. But a lot of times in the evening, he went up to the mountain and he would pray or he would go wherever. And he was a camp out kind of guy, wasn't he? He'd have to do those kinds of things. He ate wherever someone invited him. That's where he got his food. So he's telling this man, if you're truly going to follow me, you need to know what you're getting into. You need to understand that there is some hardships in what we do. Are there hardships in Christianity?
There is, if you do it right.
Yes. If you get committed to it, it can be some hardships.
Well, Paul said,
Yes.
those that live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution.
You will suffer persecution.
The problem is we don't stand up for the gospel come, and we live in a world, we have lived in a world that was friendly with Christianity, so. But now, you go read about the pioneer preachers and some of the things they went through.
Mm-hmm.
They went through a lot of that. But that's the problem in the church today. There's no backbone. We don't stand up for truth. And when you do stand up for truth, you're going to be persecuted within and without. I can verify that.
Yes.
So, we talked yesterday in the business meeting about evangelism. We said some good things, but how many of us are going to, act?
Yes. You know, before I get to the next thing, I was trying to figure out where to insert this. This morning, on our radio program that we support, Stephen Hall, Corinth, was the speaker, and he spoke to some things that it looks like it's going to be next week before we get to. And I was like, oh, why can't we get to it a little quicker? But he was talking about some certain things that kind of mix in with what we're looking at right now, and it was just really profound. And he was talking about we as preachers, and his lesson was about, and I've talked about this before too, but he said preachers, when we preach and when we teach our classes, we're not up here to offend anybody. That's not our purpose. I like this little statement. He said, well, you know, some people have come up to him and said, well, you stepped on my toes. I've said that too. You know, he said, well, I wasn't aiming for your toes. I was aiming for your heart. And I never thought about it that way. He's right about that we're not aiming to hurt your toes. We're aiming to prick your heart like they did on the day of Pentecost to commit and do better in our lives. But he was saying that even though we're not trying to offend, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, if we're preaching the gospel, we're going to offend. There's going to be people that just will not accept it. That's what Jesus did in these last 2 chapters of John. He was offending these Pharisees over and over and over again. It's offensive, and you're going to say offensive things. The thing that we're going to see next week over in chapter 10, Jesus is going to start pronouncing woes on Chorazin and Bethsaida. Do you think the people of those cities like to hear that? Woe to you! You know, Sodom would have been better off than you. And we'll talk about that when we get there, but that was a part of it. And so he was talking about how we're going to offend. And then he said something else. I said, yep, I've been there too. I know I've said something and someone didn't like what I said. It offended them. And then sure enough, someone else comes up and they're like James and John. Well, we need to put some lightning strikes on that person. You weren't hard enough on them. So then you get someone else that says you're not preaching hard enough. And so, you know, it's tough. But then we take it to the next step. He was talking about preachers, but it's that way, James, with every Christian. If we're teaching the gospel, we're going to come across somebody and we're going to say something about the gospel of Christ, and they're not going to like it. It's going to be offensive to them. And so Jesus tells us here, he tells this first man, he says, you know, it's a hard life. You're going to go to these cities. He's going to talk about that again here in chapter 10. And there's going to be some people that's going to reject them along the way. Get ready for it. You're going to see rejection. Prepare yourself. Well, the second man said, I will follow you after my father dies and settle his estate. Now, that's what he's really saying there. You know, let me bury my father. There's some idioms in there. And the idea here is the father has not died. He's just at an older age. He's probably not going to live very many more years. So let me stay with my father, and after he passes, then I'll jump in there and be a part of this. And so he said, I will follow you after my father dies and the estate's all settled and things like that. Jesus said what? Let the dead bury the dead. Go out and publish the kingdom. You know, because this is the other thing. This was real life. This wasn't a parable. But I could see it very, very much. Okay, so Jesus says, okay, I understand. You need to be with your father here the last couple of years and so on. Now the father dies, everything's settled. And then he comes back and says, well, now I got something else going now. When I get that done, then I will follow you. And then when that gets done, something else has come up. And you know, it could just take its head. And Jesus took it as it was. It was just an excuse. We can throw out anything out there and make it an excuse and just say, I've got to get this done first. Which tells us that that was a priority. When we say, I need this first, that's a priority, isn't it? First, second, third is priorities. So we see that there. Third man says, well, basically he said, I want to go home and tell everybody goodbye before we leave out for this. But the thing is, the family has a way of changing your mind, you know? Yes, folks, I'm with my family. You know what? There's this mission trip. I want to go do this mission trip, go over to whatever country. No, you don't need. You don't want to go over there, you know. And they can talk you out of it. Just very, very quickly. Something you're determined to do that's right, something that's good. Family and friends can talk you and will attempt to draw you away from that. So Jesus just looks at these as excuses. And here's the thing. As Christians, you got to put your hand to the plow and you cannot look back. He's talking about commitment there. And, you know, of course, I've always been told you got the plow, you got the beast of burden pulling the plow, and you start looking back, guess what happens? You start doing that, you know, and the roads get crooked, and that's what happens. When we look back in our Christian life, our path gets crooked, and we lose our commitment to what we're trying to do along the way.
In this modern age, we could say you can't drive down the road looking in the rearview mirror
Right.
because you get the same effect. You're all over the road.
You're all over the road, and somebody in front of you might stop too, and all of a sudden, smack. Yeah.
Or maybe it'd be, you can't go down the road and be texting.
Right. We're doing a lot of other things that people do. Don't need to be doing that. But that's pretty much it. This is a pretty good little stopping point. But we do have another minute or two. If anyone else has a comment? Anybody? So as we look here in the last part of chapter 9, we do see, you know, this is a little passage here where people came to Jesus, made excuses, and we need to be careful about not making those excuses. There's a song, and I don't know all the lyrics to it. I'd have to go find it and write it down, but the song's called Excuses, and it talks about all the excuses. I mean, it's verse after verse of the excuses people make it for not being a part of the church and not being at church and such. So let's be careful. Lord willing, we'll pick it up with chapter 10 next week, and we will see this mission of the 70 and as he sends them on their way. And we need to also be very energetic to do that too. Hope you have a good rest of the day, a good rest of the week. We got a singing at Bush's Chapel this afternoon, 2:30. Hope many of you can be at that. And if you go, oh, well, that'll keep us from being at Richland place at 4. No, it's over at 3:30. You can get over in 30 minutes, one to the other, and you can go do that too and be a part of all this this afternoon. If you're watching online, we'll be back in about 10 minutes with our worship. We hope you join us.